Hey, what's up, everyone? Renee back here with part two of my New York Film Festival vlog, diary, however you want to call it. It is Monday. I just got home not that long ago. I am kind of exhausted and I am sick and tired of rain, of water. And I'll explain why in a minute. If you are not familiar or you're new to this, I am attending and covering New York Film Festival for the very first time for the channel here, LOWKEYGEEK. New York Film Festival has always been one of my favorite film festivals, and of course, because it's my local festival too. It's my New York festival. Always enjoyed the movies there. I already have part one of the diary up on the channel by the time that this goes up, where it covered kind of like my day and a half, my first day and a half. So this is like my, I guess, second full day at the festival. Let's just call it, just to be clean, my third day at the festival. Yeah, so what I'm doing is that I'm just kind of recapping my experiences and my reactions to the films that I check out. Later on, once I have more time, each of the films that I'm checking out, I will have a dedicated review for them on the channel. So a best way to just make sure you're on top of all that and you want to hear my thoughts and everything is just to make sure you're subscribed. So just make sure that you're subscribed or following me on the podcast channel as well if you're listening to this on podcast format. There are going to be roughly around 20 movies that I'm watching. Another great way to see which movies are on my watch list is to check out my Letterboxd account, where I created a list of all the movies I'm planning to watch. And then you'll also see kind of my rating and thoughts of each movies that I see on there. Again, everything is linked in the description of this episode of this video that I'm doing right here. So, like I said, it's Monday. I woke up extremely early because the first movie that was screening today was a movie that I knew if I missed out on it, I will be hating myself, because this was a movie that I have been eagerly anticipating ever since it was announced earlier this year, and that is The Boy and the Heron. The latest animated feature film from Hayao Miyazaki after a 10-year hiatus. Studio Ghibli, of course, is one of the studios that I'm always looking forward to whenever a new movie is out, whenever they put something out. I have multiple favorites from Hayao Miyazaki. He is a legend when it comes to animation and anime. So when I heard that this movie was coming out, the one thing that really drew my attention was how they went about in releasing it. In Japan, they did no promo, no marketing. So no trailers were put out, no press photos or anything was put out. They did like a small, like kind of like a brief social media thing where they just made an announcement, and they had like certain hand-drawn images just telling you basically, oh, this is the name of the movie and this is when it's coming out, right? So it was kind of just like an interesting spin, and something that I always have wished and hoped that American studios or a American studio would try once and see what happens. But they did in Japan, and it worked. Tons of people who obviously who are fans of Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli went out in droves opening weekend, and it broke records, and it continues to break records and all that. This was kind of touted as Hayao Miyazaki's his final film. Is it going to be? We don't know right now, because he kind of expressed interest that maybe he may want to do another one after this. I think it was just one of those things where if you've been gone for a very long time and he did something that he's very passionate about, you kind of get that, that feeling again, that kind of like, oh, I want to create more. I want to create. So maybe he's got kind of like, that urge to do more and all that. So I went there early to make sure that I stood in line and I secured my spot. So I left the house and I got there really early. The screening was supposed to be at 10 a.m. I got there at 8:30 and there were already people in line. Not a lot, but there were like a good, I would say maybe 25 people in line at the point that I got there. So I'm like, all right, I think I made the right choice. However, it has been raining and it's been cold. So we basically had to stay online for a good hour and change in, getting soaked, getting pretty much drenched. Of course I had my umbrella and all that, but it was extremely windy too, because this was all part of like some little nor'easter that we're getting for the next couple of days. My pants were soaked. Like this whole part of my body was kind of wet and what have you. But I said to myself, hey, rain or shine, I'm going to see this damn freaking movie, right? So when we finally got seated and all that, they did something really nice. They gave us kind of like these little press kits for the movie with some nice images. Now, I decided not to look at any of this because even to the moment of the screening this morning, I have not watched a single trailer. The only image that I saw was the image that they posted on the Lincoln Center New York Film Festival website to talk about the film. That's the only thing I saw, and then that was the only kind of like synopsis I've read as well, which was in a sense pretty vague, right? So then afterwards, obviously, after the movie screened, of course, I'm like reading everything, and they give you like a nice little details of everything here and all that. So I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, so go inside and I watched the movie. And I guess what I should start off with, let me start off with the synopsis here. Is a boy discovers an abandoned tower in his new town and enters a fantastical world with a talking gray heron. That's the description on Letterboxd. When you think of Studio Ghibli, and especially if you're a fan of animation, if you're a fan of anime, Studio Ghibli always stands out because for a lot of people, Studio Ghibli is almost like an entry into the world of anime. And for every person who is a fan of Studio Ghibli, there is always going to be a movie or several movies that you call out and say, I'm a fan of this, because of these, right? For a lot of people, My Neighbor Totoro was kind of the first one that drew them into this world of the Ghibli universe, of the Ghibli animation style and what have you, the world of Hayao Miyazaki. Some would say Laputa, Castle in the Sky, Nausicaa, right? For me, it was Howl's Moving Castle. I mean, I've seen Totoro before that, but for me, the one that stands up as number one is Howl's Moving Castle. And then for a while, ever since The Wind Rises, which was the last movie that Miyazaki wrote and directed, which was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. But that came out like 2013, 10 years ago. I felt like something was missing in that movie, and then, that's when Hayao kind of semi-retired or took a break. What a difference a break makes, because this movie reminds me what drew me to Studio Ghibli and solidifies Hayao Miyazaki as the pristine animator when it comes to anime, when it comes to feature film. It's a technical achievement and a visual masterpiece. It blew my freaking mind away. It was gorgeous, beautiful, well animated. And again, it's that hand-drawn animation that we don't see anymore these days. You could tell he took the time to do all that while still introducing some new things. There was a moment in the beginning of the movie where there's a fire, and the boy in question, Maheto, he's rushing to the fire because it's a hospital, and that's where his mom works. And they're doing this like blurry, motion blurring effect that looked so nice. Like it was so well done. It was gorgeous, And then the story itself, the whole thing with the boy and the heron, that's like not even part of the whole story. That's like a beginning. That's like the gateway into what was eventually revealed all throughout. It was a beautiful story. To some, I'm sure it would be a little confusing. And I will say that in very typical Miyazaki form and Ghibli form, you go through most of the movie in the beginning not knowing what the hell is going on. But halfway through and then towards the end, they finally explain a lot of things, and then things kind of go hand in hand, go together, right? And you get a lot of that here. But the overall arching kind of sentiment is remembrance, appreciation. I'm reading a lot of this from my notes here. Legacy, family history, right? That seems to be the overarching themes of this movie. Being, there's a part of it where it kind of displays dedication and how too much dedication and passion for one's thing could drive you crazy, right? And how there should always be kind of a balance. It was very much like Alice in Wonderland or Wizard of Oz. I felt a lot of the same kind of themes in there. Not exactly to the T, but there's like little like nods to it, and you can kind of like sense it. My gosh, it's something that everyone should experience. If you love the format, if you love this type of genre, if you have an appreciation for just art and animation, this is a must-see for all of you out there. It was just gorgeous, and it reminded me of what's been missing within Studio Ghibli. Because even though, for Miyazaki, like, The Wind Rises may have been his last film, we've been getting other movies, but for me, it's never been to that quality. And with Miyazaki kind of coming back and giving us this, I missed it, and this reminded me again of why I love him so much as an animator, as a director, as a writer. It reminds me of how he was able to form Studio Ghibli and why Studio Ghibli is known for such fantastical masterpieces, such brilliant works of art and storytelling. It just blew my mind. It blew me away. And the majority of the crowd really enjoyed it. I do feel like a lot of the story may have kind of flew over some people's heads a bit. You have to allow yourself to be immersed in this world. Let it take you on for the ride. The score was great. And the pamphlet here mentions the theme song, Spinning Globe. Lyrics, music performed by Kenshi Yonezu. It's really, really good. Just everything was really good about this. And again, I want to talk so much more about it, but like I said, I will make sure to dedicate a separate video, a separate review for this particular movie. But I am so glad I woke up so early and stood out in the cold and rain to watch this movie, because it was well worth it. And I was so happy when it was all said and done. And honestly, I would love to see it again. So when it finally gets its full theatrical run, I trust me, I am definitely going to be checking it out for sure. Hey everyone, this episode is brought to you by Mint Mobile. Make sure to check out the link in the description of this episode or scan the QR code you see on the screen right now and find out how you can get unlimited data for only $15 a month. Save a whole ton of money on your monthly cell phone bill without sacrificing any of the quality. No contracts to worry about. You can cancel anytime, and the transferring process is so easy. You can keep your phone number or get a new one. Need a new phone? They got you covered as well. Over a year ago, I switched from Verizon without any hesitation, and it's not just because I found Ryan Reynolds to be a sexy mother. Shut your mouth. I'm just talking about Mint Mobile, but I guarantee you, if you give Mint Mobile a shot, you'll understand why I made that switch, and you too will be a happy Mint Mobile customer. So once again, check out Mint Mobile, link in the description of this episode or QR code on your screen. Check them out. All right. The next movie I was able to see, and one thing that's really cool about the festival is, and I mentioned this in the previous diary entry, majority of the main slate of films, the ones that are very much, the focal point for a lot of people who are watching films and covering films at the festival, are held in one particular theater called the Walter Reed Theater at Lincoln Center. So my day was basically going to be revolving around, movies that are shown at this theater. One thing that's really cool is that if you're going to be attending the next film after the one you just watched, they give you kind of like a red ticket like this, which allows you to kind of just go back without having to go back in line or queue in line. So what many people do, and what I do, is that we leave our bags there just to save our seat. so that we could come back and all that. So I thought that was really neat that they do that. Who knows? Maybe that's always the case. But again, this is my first time doing this stuff. So I thought it was pretty neat, But the next movie on my list, and it's funny, it kind of feels like I had a Japanese morning. And the movie is called Evil Does Not Exist. Evil Does Not Exist is from director Ryosuke Hamaguchi, who is one of my favorite Japanese directors. You should be familiar with his name. He was known for Drive My Car, which won the Oscar for Best International Feature Film. One of my favorite movies. I've mentioned before that there's another movie of his that I really loved, and it kind of like introduced me to him as a director, and that is Happy Hour, kind of like the 5-hour opus that he did there. So a huge fan. So of course I was really looking forward to his next movie here, Evil Does Not Exist. So for all of you, the quick synopsis here: Takumi and his daughter Hana lives in Mizubiki village close to Tokyo. Like generations before them, they live a modest life according to the cycles and order of nature. One day, the village inhabitants become aware of a plan to build a glamping site near Takumi's house, offering city residents a comfortable escape to nature. When two company representatives from Tokyo arrive in the village to hold a meeting, it becomes clear that the project will have a negative impact on the local water supply, causing unrest. The agency's mismatched intentions endanger both the ecological balance of the plateau and their way of life, with an aftermath that affects Takumi's life deeply. So the synopsis here on Letterboxd actually gives a good amount of most of the story there. I will say, watching this movie, I don't consider this to be maybe one of his best, but it's definitely a really good movie of his. The main themes here is like city versus nature, not understanding the simplicity of humanity, poisoning of pre-established environments or communities, kind of like the interruption of industry when it comes to nature. The expansion of city and all that, and when I was reading an interview with Ryosuke Hamaguchi, people were asking him about his stance on kind of, the environment and environment issues and all that. And he says, I don't have any one particular stance here. I just make a movie. He made this movie based off of wanting to work with an artist who is responsible for the score of this film. The music was done by Aiko Ishibashi, and he was kind of tasked to do kind of visuals to accompany her music or to make a music video. And that's kind of what spawned him wanting to do this type of movie. But, I think he's being a little coy too, because with anything, of course, you're going to have some influences on your personal influences in some of the storytelling that you're putting together here. One of the things that really fascinated me and intrigued me about this movie is that people in Japan, especially when it comes to trends, they really can take on a trend like full on once they see the popularity of a certain trend, especially trends coming from the West, from here in America and all that. I've seen this with food. I've visited there many times. I always joke that Japan is like my second home. It's because I've been there so much and I'm very familiar with a lot of the areas there. But when they notice things that are popular here in the West, they tend to want to adopt it for themselves, but it takes time, maybe a couple of years after the fact or what have you. Glamping had a moment here in the United States where it became a big craze. Everyone wanted to go glamping and all that. So it's funny that, several years later, or many years later, glamping has become like a very popular thing in Japan, and they're always trying to find ways to increase tourism, not from foreigners, but from within Japan, especially those who are city folk, like people from Tokyo, the salarymen, the salarywomen. They want escapism, right? They want escape. And in doing so, they want to find new ways to get that escape, especially when it involves nature, because Japanese people in general have a passion for nature. They love nature. So I thought this was very, very interesting. And you will see a lot of that come into play, especially with the two representatives from this company interacting with the locals of this environment, of this community. And you can see that dynamic and the differences there and all that. This was categorized as kind of a thriller, but majority of the movie, I didn't see what that meant. It was the last, I want to say 15 to 10 minutes of the movie where all of that came about. And it really surprised me. And I was like, oh, this is where it all came about. Like, and the only thing I'll say without spoiling anything is like, again, at what lengths will someone take to ensure that nothing interferes with their environment, with their community? Very, very great filmmaking. There was a lot of one shots, panning shots that was done very brilliantly, very purposeful and very intimate camera angles and moments with characters, which he does really well. It kind of makes you more connected with the characters that you're watching so that you can feel what they feel, you understand their plights, what have you, and that. He does a lot of that stuff very, very well. The score and soundtrack, of course, was just really good, and everything was just really, really it really all blended well together, and it was so beautifully done. And yeah, it was very, again, I wouldn't say it was one of his better movies, but it's definitely a very good movie of his for sure. And something that I would recommend if you are a fan of all that. Last movie on my list here. So after Evil Does Not Exist, I kind of took a break. I went to have lunch. I went to eat at this really, really nice diner near Lincoln Center that I love. I always love to go there when I have a chance. And then I went back to check out The Beast, or as it's pronounced in French, La Bête. La Bête is a French-Canadian film directed by Bertrand Bonello. It stars one of my favorite actresses today, Léa Seydoux, and George McKay. You may be familiar with George McKay from a movie, 1917. In the near future, emotions have become a threat. Gabrielle decides to purify her DNA in a machine that will immerse her in her past lives and rid her of any strong feelings. But then she meets Louis, and although he seems dangerous, she feels a powerful connection to him as if she has known him forever. So this movie was an interesting one, I will say. It was again, my experience when it comes to French film is very little, but from what I've seen, this is a very, very French film. Like, definition of French film. Very avant-garde in many ways, very confusing, mixing of a lot of different tones and genres, and just a lot of experimentation, especially when it comes to framing of certain shots or kind of the formatting of a lot of the sequences and all that. Lovely one shots are seen throughout this film, which I really appreciate. The two will switch language in a heartbeat. They'll go from French to English and then back, vice versa. They'll just very free flowing, which I thought was so interesting and very, very unique to see. The movie takes place in 3 time periods. It takes place in Paris right around the time of the Great Flood of Paris. Then it'll skip forward and kind of skip around between 2044 and 2014. And basically, it's kind of like a love story, a forbidden love story, or unrelenting or unrealized love story between the two. And basically you go on this journey of them feeling that there's a connection between themselves all throughout these different iterations of their lives, or versions of of a life that they live, because again, they are who they are back in France. And then they are different people, but still somewhat the same in 2014. and then their versions of themselves again in 2044, right? And they, in 2044, where I guess the main crux of this story kind of originates, AI is big. The sense of feelings is kind of frowned upon. So everyone kind of has to be on a keel level. So that's where the whole DNA remanufacturing comes into play, to kind of get rid of all of those strong feelings, to kind of get rid of all of those connections, especially connections to past lives. And we're talking about legitimate past lives, because again, we're talking about different lives, versions of their lives in these different time frames and all that. But the common theme in every time frame is that these two have come across each other, and there is a draw, there is a connection there. And it's a romantic connection, but it's a connection that could never be achieved because of some incident or something that prevents them from being together. There were times where I felt like it kind of dragged. I will admit, this movie felt it was extremely long. It was 146 minutes. So we sat through a lot, for sure. But I will say the one thing that stood out was the acting. Léa Seydoux, this was probably some of the best acting I've seen her do ever. Her performance was extremely strong. George McKay, who I heard was a last-minute replacement for his role. I don't know who it was that he replaced. But again, strong performance from him too. He plays an American version of himself in 2014, which I thought was extremely hilarious. It kind of portrays more of a toxic masculinity when it comes to that period and the dynamic between the two. So that is definitely something that stands out. And I have to say, this movie was ambitious overall. It was an extremely ambitious film, for this director, who I'm not familiar with at all. But from what I've heard of people saying, from the audience, from the rest of the people, it is very similar to his previous works of like Nocturama and Zombie Child. Coma was something that they were mentioning too, from what I was hearing them, but I am not familiar with any of these films. Does it make me want to go back and check them out? Maybe. I am a little intrigued, I will say. But yeah, it is just overall kind of a very compelling film in many ways, but also confusing. And it really tests you as an audience as your patience. I also kind of want to say, but there's a lot of stuff that happened there. But if anything, I will kind of mention it's definitely the strong performances by the two. It is something to be recognized for sure. And I don't know if I enjoyed this movie, but I am happy I saw it. And the one thing that intrigued me again, it was Léa Seydoux. I wanted to see her in this film. And just when I heard the description of the movie, it intrigued me, So I am happy I saw it. I don't think it's a movie that I can see again. And if I were to recommend this movie, I would have to recommend it to people who are very much into like those type of films, into like French cinema, very experimental films, very avant-garde type films, very, films that they test the limits of the audience and their own filmmaking, especially when it comes to visualizations, sound, concepts, and all that. No, I'm glad I saw it. And if you watched my previous diary entry, I mentioned someone that I'm calling the Carnival Clown or Pennywise, because of this person's laughter. And boy, did I find out that he was in this screening, because I didn't see him before, but I heard the laughter. And I was like, oh, he's here. And it was like in full form. It was in full force. And I thought now that I hear it, all I can do is laugh. But I can see how it could be distracting. When I was watching Anatomy of a Fall, and this same person was laughing a lot during some sequences, the lady sitting next to me was visibly annoyed, and even at one point kind of did one of those kind of things like that. So I could see how for some people it can be really annoying. I think for me now, it's like one of those things that I am now always looking forward to hearing and checking out, because for me, it's just kind of comical at this point. And, you know, Blake, who I do the Movie Time podcast with, he has kind of a laugh that stands out, you know, and maybe to some it can be distracting or obnoxious or whatever, but it's something that I'm used to. That is his character, and it doesn't bother me, you know. So I guess it could kind of be described as that. But this guy's laughter is more of like what? like I said, like if you know Pennywise, it's more like that. So it is very, very interesting and fascinating. But nope, that was my Monday, my day today at New York Film Festival. This part 2 of my diary blog. I am taking a break tomorrow because yes, there are some films that I do want to check out, especially a film, All Dirt Roads Taste of Salt, because I've heard nothing but good things about it. But I need the day to kind of catch up, you know, kind of review what I'm doing here and actually publishing them, right? I'm kind of lacking and kind of behind on that stuff. So I want to make sure I take the day to do all that stuff. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach out to some of the people involved with those movies to see if they would be nice enough to either allow me to attend more of the public screenings, or if they would be happy enough and be kind enough to send me maybe a screener to check out so that I could really see them for myself, especially the Taste of Things that's screening tomorrow, because I need to understand why France has opted to put the Taste of Things in contention for international foreign film at the Oscars instead of Anatomy of a Fall, which won the Palme d'Or. I'm so curious about that, so I need to find that out. So I would love to check out that movie and see why that is. But yeah, that ends today's journal entry. Thank you again so much for watching and or listening. Really appreciate it, and I appreciate all the support as always. You know the drill. Like, subscribe, follow, comment, leave a nice comment for all of you who are interested in the movies that I'm talking about. Would love to hear your thoughts about everything that I'm saying. And help further, help show support by checking out stuff in the description of this video, whether it's through affiliates or through the shop. Buy a shirt, buy a sticker, what have you. It would be greatly, greatly appreciated. But stay tuned for journal entry part 3 for the movies that I will be seeing on Wednesday. Looking forward to Wednesday. So again, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay cool, stay classy, stay safe. I am going to bed. Peace out, y'all. Bye-bye.